The door hit her before she could knock. It swung outward hard, catching her on the shoulder, and she stumbled back into the mud of the main street. The woman who came through it didn't look at her, just stepped around her like she was a fence post and kept walking. Lena stood there for a moment, with her bag in her arms and the cold coming up through the soles of her boots. The bag was the kind women use for dry goods, not travel. She hadn't planned to travel. She hadn't planned much of anything in the last 3 days. The trading post door was still open. Inside, a man with a grey mustache was watching her from behind the counter. He had the look of someone who'd already decided something. "Need something," he said. "Room," she said, "or just somewhere to sit until the weather breaks." He looked at the window. The sky outside had gone the color of a bruise, purple-green and low. Snow had been threatening since morning, and now it wasn't threatening anymore. It was just starting. "No rooms," he said. "Try Calloway's." She'd tried Calloway's, and the place before Calloway's whose name she hadn't caught. The woman there had taken one look at her bag, at her coat with the tear along the left seam, and shaken her head before Lena had finished her sentence. She stepped back out. The door swung shut behind her. The snow was coming sideways now, driven by a wind that hadn't been there an hour ago. She pulled the bag to her chest and walked. Not because she had somewhere to go, just because standing still felt worse. The town was called Dunn's Crossing. She'd come through it 6 years ago with her husband. On the way to the homestead they'd filed for 40 miles north. She hadn't recognized it coming in today. Or maybe she had, and just hadn't wanted to admit where she was. She'd been walking since yesterday mornings. Before that, 3 days of not eating much. Before that, a week of trying to make sense of a situation that didn't have any sense left in it. The homestead was gone, not burned. Just lost. Her husband had borrowed against it twice that she knew of, maybe more that she didn't. When he died, the debt came due, and the men who came to collect were polite about it. That was the worst part. They were polite, and they let her pack one bag, and they drove her to the road in their wagon, without saying much. She hadn't cried. She didn't know what that meant about her. She just picked up her bag and walked south and kept walking. A gust came off the mountain and knocked the breath out of her. She grabbed at a hitching post to stay upright. Her fingers found the iron and held on. When the gust passed, she looked up and saw the wagon. It was a work wagon, not pretty. The bed full of wrapped bundles and 2 big mules standing hip-shot in the traces, their backs already dusted with snow. The man loading it had his back to her. He was large in the way that mountains are large, without seeming to be aware of it. He lifted a crate that should have taken 2 men and set it against the sideboards with a thud she could feel in her feet. She didn't mean to speak. The words came out because there was nothing else left. "Excuse me," she said. He turned. He had a beard heavy and dark, and eyes that were quiet in the way that still water is quiet. He looked at her without saying anything, not rudely, just looking. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know why I stopped you. I'm not sure what I'm asking." He looked at her bag, at her coat, at her face, which she was as aware must show 3 days of bad weather and less sleep than that. "You come in on foot?" he said. "Yes." "From where?" "North Road," she said. 40 miles, give or take." He turned back to his wagon. She thought that was that. She let go of the hitching post and started to move. "Wait," he said. She stopped. He reached under the wagon seat and pulled out a length of oilcloth. He held it out to her without walking over, like he expected her to come get it herself. She crossed to him and took it. It was heavy and stiff with cold. "Put it over your shoulders," he said. "Weather's turning bad. I can see about that. Where are you trying to get to?" It was a reasonable question. She didn't have a reasonable answer. "I don't know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He checked the knot on one of the ropes holding the load. Then he said, "I'm going up the North Fork. 4 miles. You can ride in the back if you want." She looked at the wagon, at him, at the snow coming down between them. "I don't have any money," she said. "I didn't ask for any." She thought about what her mother would have told her, what any sensible woman would have told her. "You don't climb into a stranger's wagon in a snowstorm 4 miles from nowhere. You don't." But her feet were wet through, and the oilcloth he'd given her was already the warmest she'd been all day, and there was something about the way he'd gone back to checking his ropes that made her feel like he'd already forgotten the offer, and she could take it or leave it. She climbed up into the wagon bed. He came around and checked the mule's harness without looking at her again. Then he climbed up to the seat and clicked his tongue, and the mules moved. She sat among his bundles with the oilcloth around her shoulders and watched the town of Dunn's Crossing disappear into the snow behind them. She didn't mean to fall asleep. She didn't think she could, with the cold and the rocking and the sound of the wind. But she did. She woke up when the wagon stopped and the mules went still, and there was a silence that felt different from moving silence. She sat up. The snow had thickened. Through it she could see a cabin, low and dark, with a stovepipe on one end. Behind it, barely visible, a lean-to stable. Around them, on 3 sides, the mountain rose until it disappeared into the white. He was already down from the seat. He walked to the back of the wagon and looked at her. "Can you walk?" he said. She tried to stand, and her left leg went sideways under her. She caught herself on the sideboard. He watched but didn't reach for her, giving her a moment to sort herself out. She sorted herself out as she climbed down. The snow on the ground came to her ankles. He was already moving toward the stable with the mules. "Go inside," he said, without turning around. "Doors not locked. Light the lamp on the table. There's wood next to the stove." She stood in the snow for a moment, watching him unhitch the mules, pulling the traces free, leading them one at a time into the shelter of the lean-to. He moved with the unhurried care of a man who'd done this in worse weather than this and expected he'd do it again. He checked each animal's legs and back. He pulled an old feed sack from a hook and rubbed the snow off the nearest mule's flank before he did anything else. She turned and walked to the cabin. Inside it was dark and smelled like pine resin and something she couldn't name. Not bad, just old. Lived in the way a place gets when it's been lived in by one person for a long time. She found the lamp on the table and the matches beside it and got it lit. The room jumped into pale yellow light. It was one room, a table, 2 chairs, a stove in the far corner with a box of split wood beside it, a shelf with a few tins and a flour sack, a cot against the wall with a wool blanket folded at the foot of it. No pictures, no rugs. A rifle above the door on 2 wooden pegs. She went to the stove and got it lit. By the time he came in, stomping the snow from his boots at the door, she had her coat off and was sitting close to the heat, with her hands open in front of it. She heard him come in. She heard him hang something on a peg near the door. She didn't turn around right away. "You eat today?" he said. "This morning," she said, which was true if you counted half a biscuit she'd found in her coat pocket. He went to the shelf. She heard him moving things around. She turned and watched him. He took down a tin and set it on the table, pulled an iron pot from somewhere, filled it from a bucket near the door and put it on the stove beside her. She moved to give him room without thinking about it, and he stepped past her without comment. He opened the tin. Dried salt pork, cut thick. He laid pieces into a cast iron skillet that he set on the grate, and the sound it made, the first fat hiss of meat hitting hot iron, was the first thing in 3 days that had made her feel like something might be okay. She didn't say anything. She just listened to the sizzle and watched the lamplight move on the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she'd sat somewhere that wasn't moving or open to the sky. He fried the salt pork and boiled some rice from a cloth sack and sliced cornbread from a cold pan on the shelf, the kind that keeps a few days if the cold doesn't get to it. He put it all on the table and sat down across from her and ate without ceremony. She ate. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started. It wasn't the kind of hunger that makes you impatient. It was the deep, still kind, the kind that comes from going long enough Without that, the body stops announcing itself. When she swallowed the first bite, she felt it move all the way down, and something behind her eyes threatened to give way, and she pressed her lips together and held on. He didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't make anything of it. When they were done, he carried plates to a basin near the door. She started to rise, and he said, "Sit." Just that. She sat. He washed the plates. She watched him without meaning to. His hands were big and careful. He wasn't a man who rushed things. "I'm Lena," she said. It was the first thing she'd told him about herself. He set a plate on the shelf. "Tava," he said. "Thank you," she said, "for the wagon." And she gestured at the table, the stove, the room. "It's supper," he said. "Don't thank me for supper." She didn't know what to say to that. She didn't say anything. Later she lay on the cot with the wool blanket pulled up and watched the shadows from the stove play on the ceiling. He'd taken a bedroll from the shelf. She hadn't even known it was there, and put it on the floor on the far side of the room without comment. He lay down and he was asleep, or appeared to be, in the time it took her to figure out how to arrange the blanket. She'd expected to lie awake. She always lay awake. She'd lain awake every night, since they'd handed her the papers on the homestead and driven her to the road. She was asleep before the stove settled. Morning came in grey and cold, and she woke to the sound of the door closing. He'd gone out. She could hear, distantly, the sound of the mules. She sat up. The stove was still putting out some heat. He'd stoked it before he went out. On the table was a tin cup of water and half a piece of cornbread. She drank the water. She looked at the room. In the daylight, it was plainer than she'd realized, and also more solid. The logs were fitted close and well chinked. The shelf was level. The floor had been swept recently. The shirt smelled like. It was the cabin of a man who didn't own much but took care of what he had. She folded the blanket. She found a broom leaning against the wall and swept where she'd tracked snow in the night before. He came in when she was looking at the shelf, trying to figure out if there was something she could do about breakfast. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I was going to make something, if that's all right." He looked at the shelf. "There's oats," he said. "Top tin." She made oatmeal on the stove with water and a little dried fruit she found in a cloth bag. He sat down without being asked and ate, without saying it was good, but he finished it, and she counted that for something. After, he said, "Storm should break by midday. I can take you back to Dunn's Crossing this afternoon. Put you on the stage." She looked at the window. The snow had stopped. The sky was still low, but there was light in it, the particular flat light that comes after a heavy storm. "The stage to where?" she said. He looked at her. "Wherever you're going." "I told you last night," she said. "I don't know where I'm going." He was quiet. "I had a homestead," she said, 40 miles north. "My husband died in September. There was debt. They took it." She said it the way you say something you've told yourself enough times that the words have worn smooth. "I have a sister in Billings. I haven't spoken to her in 6 years. I have $23 in the bottom of that bag, and I don't know if $23 is enough to get to Billings, or if she'd want me there if I arrived." He was looking at his hands on the table. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't have to be," she said. "It is what it is." He was quiet for another moment. Then he stood up and went outside, and she heard him start on the morning's work. She spent the morning inside, and then, because sitting still was its own kind of misery, she went out. He was splitting wood behind the cabin. She watched him for a while from the corner of the building, without him seeing her. He lifted the axe and brought it down, and the log fell in 2 perfect halves. He did it again. And again. There was no wasted motion. She'd seen men split wood who made a performance of it. He split wood the way he did everything else, like it was a thing that needed doing, and so he was doing it. She picked up the halves he'd split and stacked them against the back wall of the cabin. He noticed when he went to pick them up and found them gone. He looked at her. She looked back. She didn't say anything. He went back to splitting. She went back to stacking. They worked like that for an hour, without speaking. Inside, she heated water on the stove and washed her shirt and the dress she'd worn under her coat and hung them near the stove to dry. He came in and didn't comment on the laundry strung across his cabin. He put a pot of beans on to soak for the night. "Beans need to soak overnight," she said. "I know that," he said. She smiled before she could stop herself. It wasn't much of a smile, but it was the first one in a while. He was looking at the pot when it happened, and he didn't see it. Or maybe he was looking at the pot because he was giving her somewhere to put it. She didn't know. She didn't know much about him. He didn't volunteer things, and she wasn't the kind of woman who asked, but she noticed things. She noticed that he ate less than his size suggested, that he moved through the cabin without bumping into anything, like he knew exactly where his body was at all times, that when the wind picked up outside he went and checked on the mules before she'd even registered the change in sound. He was a man who paid attention to things, just not to people. Or not in the way that made people uncomfortable. "How long have you been up here?" she said that evening. He thought about it. 7 years, he said. "Alone?" He looked at her. "Yes." She nodded. That was enough. She didn't push. The second night she lay on the cot and listened to the mountain. Up here it had a different voice than the homestead had. Deeper, less personal somehow. The homestead had been hers and Clement's. And even at the end, even after they'd filed the papers and she'd packed the bag, she'd felt it still looking at her. All that land she'd helped break and plant and defend against 3 dry summers, like it was waiting for her to explain herself. Up here the mountain didn't know her and didn't want to. It just was. She found that easier to sleep next to. The third morning he said, "Storm's been down a day. Road'll be passable today if it doesn't come back." She was standing at the stove. She didn't turn around. "All right," she said. She heard him cross to the table. She heard the legs of a chair move. "You know how to work a garden?" he said. She turned. Then he was sitting in his chair with his hands flat on the table, not looking at her. Looking at the table. "Yes," she said. "I had one," he said. "Last summer was bad. Didn't get enough in. I've been down to town more than I'd like." He was quiet. "I've been thinking I need to put more in this spring. Bigger. The ground on the south side gets good sun. But it'd take..." He stopped. "It'd take 2 people to do it right." She stood there with the spoon in her hand. "What are you asking me?" she said. He looked up at her then. His eyes were the same color as the mountain in winter, that heavy dark gray blue. That isn't sad exact, just old and honest. "I'm not asking you anything," he said. "I'm telling you what I need. You can do what you want with that." She set the spoon down on the shelf. She thought about Billings, about her sister's face the last time she'd seen it at the wedding Lena had attended without Clement, because he'd said he didn't feel right about making the trip that year, and she'd believed him, and she'd sat alone through the whole reception, pretending she hadn't. She thought about $23 and a stage ticket and a door she hadn't knocked on in 6 years. She thought about this cabin, about the beans soaking in the pot, about the beans soaking in, about wood that needed stacking and ground on the south side that got good sun. "I don't need much," she said. "I don't take up a lot of space." He was quiet for a moment. "I know that," he said. "I'd want my own." She stopped, started again. I'm not asking for anything from you except room to work." "I know what you're asking," he said. She picked up the spoon again. She stirred what was in the pot. Her hand was steady, which surprised her a little. "Then we understand each other," she said. He pushed back from the table. "I'll get the mules settled," he said. She listened to him go out, and to the sound of his boots on the frozen ground, and to the mules greeting him the way animals greet a person they've learned to trust. Not with noise, but with a turning toward. She looked out the small window above the shelf. The mountain was white and enormous and utterly indifferent to her. She thought, "All right." She set the spoon down and went to start on the breakfast. Outside, through the wall, she could hear him moving in the lean-to, filling the feed bin, checking the water, doing what needed to be done. She put more wood on the fire.